Hi, guys. Welcome back to another fascinating journey through history. Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most iconic images from medieval times, the knight in shining armor. But have you ever wondered why these warriors chose to burden themselves with what could weigh up to 80 pounds of metal? Why did they willingly sacrifice speed and agility for protection that seemed almost impractical? The answer isn't as simple as you might think. We're going to uncover the complex web of technological advancement, social hierarchy, economic factors, and battlefield evolution that led to one of history's most recognizable fighting forces. From the earliest chainmail to the sophisticated plate armor of the late medieval period, we'll discover how knights became walking fortresses and why this transformation was absolutely essential for their survival and success. Okay, friends, before you settle in, if you enjoy this kind of deep dive content, then click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. And yes, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I really enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights and turn on the fan. And let's dive into tonight's journey together. To understand why knights wore heavy armor, we must first journey back to the very beginning of knightly warfare. The story begins in the early medieval period, around the 8th and 9th centuries, when the concept of the mounted warrior was just beginning to take shape across Europe. During this time, most warriors fought on foot, wearing simple leather garments or basic chainmail if they were fortunate enough to afford it. The transformation from foot soldier to armored knight didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual evolution driven by necessity, innovation, and the changing nature of warfare itself. The political landscape of early medieval Europe was fragmented and chaotic, with numerous small kingdoms, duchies, and tribal territories constantly at war with one another. In this environment, individual warriors who could afford better equipment had significant advantages over their less well-equipped opponents. The feudal system that emerged during this period created a warrior class that had both the motivation and the resources to invest in superior military equipment. Land ownership was tied directly to military service, creating a system where those who fought well could gain wealth and status, while those who failed could lose everything. This created powerful incentives for warriors to seek every possible advantage in combat, including the best protective equipment available. The mounted warrior represented the pinnacle of this military evolution, combining the mobility of cavalry with increasingly sophisticated armor protection. In those early days, warfare was brutal and personal. Warriors faced each other with swords, spears, and axes, often fighting in close quarters where every advantage mattered. The first knights, or rather the mounted warriors who would eventually become known as knights, quickly realized that their elevated position on horseback made them prime targets for enemy weapons. A well-placed arrow, a thrust from a spear, or a swing from an axe could easily unseat a rider and end the battle before it truly began. This vulnerability drove the development of protective gear that would define knightly warfare for centuries to come. The psychology of medieval combat was fundamentally different from modern warfare. Battles were often decided by the death or capture of key leaders, making the protection of these valuable individuals absolutely crucial to military success. The earliest form of armor worn by these proto-knights was chainmail, known in historical circles as mail or mail. This ingenious invention consisted of thousands of interlocking metal rings, each one carefully crafted and connected to its neighbors to form a flexible mesh of protection. The creation of a single mail shirt, called a hauberk, required incredible skill and patience. A craftsman would spend weeks or even months creating the tens of thousands of rings needed, each one cut from wire and individually riveted closed. The process was so labor-intensive that a quality mail shirt could cost as much as a small farm, making it accessible only to the wealthy warrior class. The technique of making mail was closely guarded by specialized craftsmen who passed their knowledge down through generations of apprentices. These mail makers developed sophisticated techniques for creating rings of consistent size and strength, using specialized tools and carefully controlled heating processes to ensure uniform quality throughout the garment. The wire used to create mail rings was itself a sophisticated product requiring advanced metallurgical knowledge. Iron had to be refined to the proper carbon content to create steel that was both flexible and strong. Too little carbon resulted in soft iron that would deform under stress, while too much carbon created brittle steel that would shatter on impact. Medieval smiths learned through generations of experience to create steel with exactly the right properties for mail construction. They developed techniques for drawing wire to consistent thickness, cutting rings to uniform size, and joining them with rivets that would hold under the extreme stresses of combat. The quality of mail could vary dramatically depending on the skill of the craftsman and the materials available, with the finest examples representing some of the most advanced metallurgy of their time. But why was chainmail so revolutionary? The answer lies in its unique properties. Unlike solid metal plates, which we'll discuss later, chainmail offered flexibility while still providing substantial protection against cutting weapons. When a sword struck chainmail, the individual rings would distribute the force of the blow across a wider area, preventing the weapon from penetrating to the flesh beneath. This was particularly effective against the slashing attacks that were common in early medieval warfare. However, chainmail had its limitations. While it could stop a blade from cutting, it couldn't prevent the blunt force trauma that came with a heavy blow. A warrior could still suffer broken ribs or severe bruising even when his mail shirt remained intact. The effectiveness of mail also depended heavily on the quality of its construction. Poorly made mail with weak rivets or irregular rings could fail catastrophically when subjected to the stresses of combat. The social implications of owning mail were profound in early medieval society. A warrior who possessed a good mail shirt was immediately recognizable as a member of the military elite. The cost of such equipment meant that only those with substantial wealth or the backing of wealthy patrons could afford it. This created a visible class distinction on the battlefield between the mail-clad elite and the leather-armored common soldiers. The possession of mail armor became a symbol of status that extended far beyond its practical military value, serving as a visible marker of social position and economic success. Lords would often provide mail shirts to their most valued retainers, creating bonds of loyalty and obligation that formed the foundation of feudal military organization. As the centuries progressed and the role of the knight became more defined, the threats they faced on the battlefield evolved as well. The introduction of more sophisticated weapons, particularly the crossbow and later the longbow, presented new challenges that chainmail alone couldn't address. These weapons could generate tremendous force, enough to drive an arrow or bolt through the links of mail and into the body beyond. Knights found themselves facing opponents who could strike from great distances with devastating accuracy, making their traditional armor inadequate for the first time in centuries. The crossbow, in particular, was feared by the knightly class because it allowed common soldiers to kill heavily armored nobles with relative ease, potentially disrupting the entire social and military hierarchy of medieval society. The development of crossbow technology represented a significant challenge to the dominance of armored cavalry. Unlike traditional bows, which required years of training to master, crossbows could be operated effectively by soldiers with minimal training. This democratization of ranged warfare meant that expensive, heavily armored knights could be brought down by relatively cheap weapons in the hands of ordinary soldiers. The mechanical advantage provided by the crossbow's lever system allowed it to generate far more force than a traditional bow, giving it the power to penetrate mail at ranges that had previously been safe for armored warriors. This technological shift forced knights to reconsider their armor requirements and led directly to the development of more comprehensive protective systems. The response to these new threats came in the form of additional protective layers. Knights began wearing padded garments called gambesons or aketon underneath their mail shirts. These thick, quilted jackets served multiple purposes. First, they provided cushioning against the weight and chafing of the mail itself. Second, they offered additional protection against blunt force trauma by absorbing and distributing impact energy. Third, they could help stop weapons that managed to penetrate the mail links. The combination of gambeson and mail created a defensive system that was significantly more effective than either component alone. The gambeson was typically made from multiple layers of linen or wool, quilted together with thousands of stitches to create a thick, resilient padding. The construction of a quality gambeson required considerable skill in textile work and could be almost as expensive as the mail shirt itself. The gambeson also served important functions beyond protection. It provided insulation against both heat and cold, making armor more comfortable to wear in various weather conditions. The thick padding helped distribute the weight of mail more evenly across the wearer's body, reducing fatigue and improving endurance in extended combat. Some gambesons were constructed with specialized features like reinforced shoulders to better support the weight of mail, or adjustable lacing systems that allowed for a more customized fit. The colors and decorations of gambesons also served heraldic purposes, allowing knights to display their family colors and symbols even when covered by mail. But even this combination wasn't enough, as weapons technology continued to advance. The development of more powerful crossbows, the increasing use of pole arms like halberds and pikes, And the introduction of early gunpowder weapons created an arms race between offense and defense that would define medieval warfare. Knights found themselves constantly adapting their protective gear to meet new threats, leading to increasingly sophisticated and heavy armor systems. The introduction of steel-tipped arrows and crossbow bolts specifically designed to penetrate armor forced armorers to develop new techniques and materials. Specialized arrowheads like bodkins were created with narrow, hardened points that could slip between mail rings or punch through thin metal plates. The evolution of polearm weapons presented a particularly serious challenge to mounted knights. Weapons like the halberd, which combined a spear point with an axe blade and a hook, were specifically designed to deal with armored cavalry. The spear point could penetrate armor, the axe blade could smash through it, and the hook could be used to drag knights from their horses. Pike formations, with their long spears held at various angles, created defensive barriers that cavalry charges couldn't easily break through. These developments forced knights to adapt their tactics and equipment, leading to the development of specialized armor pieces designed to protect against polearm attacks. The transition from mail to plate armor represents one of the most significant developments in medieval military technology. This change didn't happen overnight, but occurred gradually over the course of the 13th and 14th centuries. The process began with the addition of small plates to reinforce vulnerable areas. Knights started wearing metal plates over their knees, elbows, and shoulders, areas where mail provided less effective protection or where joints created weak points in their defense. These early plates were often called sabatons for the feet, polans for the knees, and rear brace for the upper arms. Each of these pieces represented a significant technological achievement, requiring new manufacturing techniques and design principles. The development of plate armor required a fundamental shift in metallurgical thinking. Unlike mail, which could be made from relatively simple steel wire, plates required large sheets of metal that were both thin enough to be workable and strong enough to resist weapon impacts. This required advances in steel production, including better smelting techniques, improved hammering methods, and more sophisticated heat treatment processes. Armorers had to learn to work with much larger pieces of metal than mail makers, requiring different tools and techniques. The shaping of plates to conform to the human body while maintaining strength required a deep understanding of both metallurgy and anatomy. The effectiveness of these supplementary plates quickly became apparent. Not only did they provide better protection against piercing weapons, but they also offered superior defense against the crushing blows of maces and warhammers, weapons specifically designed to defeat mail armor. The curved surfaces of well-made plates could deflect blows entirely, redirecting the energy of an attack away from the wearer's body. This was a significant improvement over mail, which could only absorb and distribute force, not redirect it. The geometric principles underlying effective plate design were sophisticated, incorporating concepts of angle and curvature that would later influence developments in architecture and engineering. The science of deflection became crucial to plate armor design. Armorers learned that the angle at which a surface met an incoming blow could determine whether the attack would be deflected harmlessly or would transfer its full force to the wearer. Curved surfaces were generally more effective than flat ones because they were more likely to cause weapons to glance off rather than making direct contact. The development of specialized ridges and flanges on armor pieces served to guide weapon blows away from vital areas. These design principles required extensive experimentation and testing, often conducted under actual combat conditions where the stakes couldn't have been higher. As smiths became more skilled in working with plate armor, they began creating larger and more comprehensive protective systems. The process of making plate armor was fundamentally different from crafting mail and required an entirely new set of skills. Instead of working with individual rings, armorers had to shape large pieces of metal to conform to the human body while maintaining structural integrity. This required sophisticated techniques, including hot forming, where metal was heated and shaped over specialized forms called stakes, and cold forming, where metal was carefully hammered and shaped at room temperature. The tools required for plate armor production were complex and expensive, including specialized hammers, stakes, and forming blocks that had to be precisely manufactured to produce consistent results. The workshop of a master armorer was a sophisticated manufacturing facility that combined elements of both forge and precision instrument shop. Different areas were dedicated to specific aspects of armor production. Heating and rough shaping occurred near the forges, while final fitting and decoration took place in areas with better lighting and more delicate tools. The organization of work in an armor workshop required careful coordination between multiple craftsmen, each specializing in different aspects of the production process. Master armorers often employed teams of specialists, including rough shapers who created the basic forms, finishers who perfected the surfaces, and decorators who added artistic elements. The creation of a complete suit of plate armor was an extraordinary undertaking that could take a master armorer and his assistants months or even years to complete. Each piece had to be carefully fitted to the individual knight, taking into account not just their body measurements, but also their fighting style and preferences. The articulation points, the joints where different pieces of armor connected, required particular attention to ensure that the knight could move freely while maintaining protection. This level of customization meant that no two suits of armor were exactly alike, making each one a unique work of art as well as a functional piece of military equipment. The fitting process required multiple sessions where the knight would visit the armorer's workshop to try on pieces and make adjustments. The technical challenges of creating articulated joints in armor were enormous. Each joint had to allow for natural human movement while preventing gaps that enemies could exploit. This required precise calculation of the ranges of motion for different body parts and careful design of overlapping plates that would move smoothly against each other. The shoulders were particularly challenging because of the complex range of motion required for sword work. Armorers developed ingenious solutions, including layered plates that could slide past each other and pivot points that allowed for rotation without creating vulnerable openings. The elbow and knee joints required similar innovations, with carefully shaped plates that could bend and flex while maintaining protection. The weight of a complete suit of plate armor varied considerably depending on its construction and the period in which it was made, but most fell within the range of 40 to 80 pounds. This might seem impossibly heavy by modern standards, But it's important to understand that this weight was distributed across the entire body through a sophisticated system of straps, buckles, and articulated joints. A properly fitted suit of armor allowed the wearer to move with surprising ease and agility. Contemporary accounts describe knights performing acrobatic feats while fully armored, including mounting their horses unaided, performing somersaults, and engaging in complex sword techniques. The distribution of weight was crucial to the armor's effectiveness. Poorly balanced armor could quickly exhaust its wearer and limit their combat effectiveness. The ergonomic principles underlying good armor design were surprisingly sophisticated. Armorers understood that weight had to be distributed in ways that didn't interfere with natural movement or put excessive strain on any particular part of the body. The heaviest pieces, such as the breastplate, were positioned close to the body's center of gravity to minimize their impact on balance and mobility. Lighter pieces were used for the extremities, where additional weight would have the greatest negative impact on agility. The suspension system that held the armor in place was carefully designed to transfer weight to the strongest parts of the body, particularly the shoulders and hips, while avoiding pressure points that could cause pain or restrict movement. The design of plate armor evolved continuously throughout the medieval period as armorers sought to balance protection, weight, and mobility. Early plates were relatively simple, offering basic coverage with minimal articulation. As techniques improved, armor became increasingly sophisticated, featuring complex joint systems that allowed for natural movement while maintaining comprehensive protection. The pinnacle of this development can be seen in the Gothic and Italian styles of the 15th century, which featured elegant lines, perfect articulation, and decorative elements that elevated armor from mere protective gear to high art. These late medieval suits represented centuries of accumulated knowledge and technological refinement, incorporating solutions to thousands of design challenges encountered by generations of armorers. The Gothic style of armor, which emerged in the late 14th century, was characterized by its angular lines and sophisticated articulation. Gothic armorers developed techniques for creating complex curved surfaces that provided excellent protection while allowing for natural movement. The style featured distinctive pointed decorative elements that weren't merely ornamental, but served to deflect weapon blows more effectively. Gothic armor also incorporated advanced metallurgical techniques that allowed for thinner, lighter plates without sacrificing protection. The reduction in weight was achieved through better steel quality and more efficient design rather than simply using less material. Italian armor of the Renaissance period represented a different approach to the same basic challenges. Italian armorers emphasized smooth, rounded surfaces that were both aesthetically pleasing and functionally effective. The Italian style favored elegant proportions and flowing lines that complemented the human form while providing comprehensive protection. Italian workshops became renowned throughout Europe for their technical excellence and artistic sophistication. The export of Italian armor became a major industry, with suits being shipped to courts and battlefields across the continent. The influence of Renaissance artistic principles can be seen in the proportions and decorative elements of Italian armor, which often incorporated classical motifs and humanist ideals. One of the most important aspects of knightly armor that's often overlooked is the economic dimension. A complete suit of armor represented an enormous investment, often costing more than a modern luxury car when adjusted for medieval economics. This expense wasn't just due to the materials involved, though good quality steel was certainly valuable. The primary cost came from the skilled labor required to create each piece. Master armorers were among the most highly paid craftsmen in medieval society, and their work was so valued that they often enjoyed the patronage of kings and nobles. The economic impact of armor production extended far beyond the immediate transaction between knight and armorer, supporting entire networks of suppliers, specialized craftsmen, and support services. The steel used in high-quality armor was itself an expensive commodity that required sophisticated production techniques. The best armor steel was made using methods that were closely guarded trade secrets, passed down through generations of master smiths. Different grades of steel were used for different parts of the armor, with the highest quality reserved for areas that faced the greatest stress. The production of armor-quality steel required careful control of carbon content, extensive working to eliminate impurities, and specialized heat treatment to achieve the proper balance of hardness and flexibility. The cost of producing this steel could account for a significant portion of the armor's final price, especially for suits made from the finest materials available. The economic burden of armor extended far beyond the initial purchase price. Maintenance was a constant concern, as even the best armor required regular care to prevent rust, repair damage, and adjust fit. Knights typically employed specialized servants called esquires or valets, whose primary responsibility was caring for their master's equipment. These servants were skilled in the techniques of armor maintenance, including cleaning, oiling, and making minor repairs. They also assisted with the complex process of putting on and removing armor, a task that could take 30 minutes or more, even with experienced help. The cost of employing these specialists added significantly to the overall expense of maintaining an armored knight in the field. The maintenance requirements of armor were extensive and required constant attention. Steel armor was vulnerable to rust, especially in the damp conditions common in medieval Europe. Regular cleaning and oiling were essential to prevent corrosion that could weaken the metal or cause joints to seize. Battle damage had to be repaired quickly to maintain the armor's protective value, requiring access to skilled armorers, or at least competent metal workers. Even minor dents could create weak points that might fail under stress, while damaged articulation points could severely limit mobility. The logistics of maintaining armor during military campaigns were complex, requiring the transport of specialized tools, materials, and skilled personnel. The social implications of wearing heavy armor were just as significant as the practical ones. In medieval society, a knight's armor served as a visible symbol of his status, wealth, and military prowess. The quality and decoration of his equipment communicated his position in the social hierarchy more clearly than any words could. A knight wearing plain, functional armor might be respected for his martial skills, but one sporting elaborately decorated plates with gold inlay and artistic flourishes commanded a different level of social recognition entirely. The armor became an extension of the knight's identity, reflecting his personal values, family history, and social aspirations. The heraldic significance of armor decoration was enormous in medieval society. Family coats of arms, personal devices, and religious symbols were incorporated into armor design to communicate the wearer's identity and allegiances. These decorative elements weren't merely ornamental, but served important practical functions in battle, allowing allies to identify friends in the confusion of combat. The development of heraldic systems was closely tied to the evolution of armor, as increasingly enclosed helmets made facial recognition impossible. The standardization of heraldic symbols and their display on armor became crucial to medieval military organization and social structure. This symbolic aspect of armor led to increasingly elaborate decoration as knights sought to distinguish themselves from their peers. Armor became a canvas for artistic expression, featuring intricate engravings, embossed designs, and precious metal inlays. Some pieces incorporated religious imagery, family heraldry, or scenes from classical mythology. The most elaborate examples were as much works of art as they were functional armor, representing the pinnacle of medieval craftsmanship and serving as status symbols that proclaimed their wearer's position in society. The cost of such decoration could exceed the price of the armor itself, making decorated suits accessible only to the wealthiest members of the nobility. The artistic techniques used to decorate armor were sophisticated and required specialized skills. Engraving involved cutting designs into the surface of the metal using sharp tools, creating patterns that could be filled with contrasting materials for emphasis. Embossing used hammers and specialized forms to create raised designs that stood out from the surface. Inlay work incorporated precious metals like gold and silver into the steel, creating elaborate patterns and images. Etching used acid to eat designs into the metal surface, allowing for incredibly detailed work. Each of these techniques required years of training to master and added significantly to the time and cost of armor production. The process of donning a complete suit of armor was itself a ritualistic affair that reinforced the knight's special status. Beginning with the padded undergarments and working outward, each piece was carefully positioned and secured according to established procedures. The order was crucial. Certain pieces had to be in place before others could be properly fitted. This complexity meant that a knight couldn't simply grab his armor and rush into battle. Preparation required time, assistance, and careful attention to detail. The ritual of arming became an important part of knightly culture, often accompanied by prayers and ceremonies that reinforced the religious and social significance of the warrior's role. The arming sequence typically began with the gambeson or padded undergarment, followed by the leg armor, starting with the sabatons for the feet and working upward. The arms were armored next, beginning with the gauntlets and proceeding to the upper arm pieces. The torso armor came next, with the breastplate being one of the most critical pieces to fit properly. Finally, the helmet was placed, often marking the moment when the knight was considered fully prepared for battle. Each step required careful attention to ensure that all pieces were properly secured and that the articulation points were correctly aligned. The assistance of experienced valets was essential for this process, as many pieces simply couldn't be put on without help. The psychological preparation that accompanied the arming process was just as important as the physical preparation. The gradual transformation from man to armored knight helped prepare the warrior mentally for the challenges ahead. The weight and restriction of the armor served as constant reminders of the seriousness of the situation, while the protection it provided boosted confidence and determination. Many knights developed personal rituals and prayers that they performed during the arming process, seeking divine protection and favor for the battles to come. The moment when the helmet was finally secured often marked a psychological transition from civilian to warrior mindset. The battlefield effectiveness of heavy armor cannot be understated when considering why knights chose to wear it despite its weight and expense. Contemporary accounts of medieval battles consistently emphasize the superior survivability of well-armored knights compared to their less protected opponents. A knight in full plate armor could wade into combat with a confidence that was impossible for lighter-equipped warriors. Arrows that would prove fatal to an unarmored man might bounce harmlessly off properly angled plates. Sword blows that could sever limbs were turned aside by the curved surfaces of well-made armor. The protection offered by armor allowed knights to take tactical risks that would be suicidal for other warriors, fundamentally changing the nature of medieval combat. The statistical advantage provided by armor was dramatic. Historical records suggest that heavily armored knights had survival rates in battle that were many times higher than those of unarmored soldiers. While exact figures are difficult to verify, contemporary sources consistently report that armored knights could fight through battles that decimated less protected forces. This survival advantage wasn't just important for the individual knight, but had strategic implications for medieval armies. The loss of a knight represented a much greater strategic setback than the loss of a common soldier, making their protection a military priority that justified enormous expense and effort. This protection extended beyond just weapons. Heavy armor also provided defense against the environmental hazards of medieval warfare. The thick padding and metal plates offered some protection against extreme temperatures, though they could also trap heat and become uncomfortably hot in warm weather. The enclosed nature of a helmet protected against dust, debris, and even insects that could prove dangerous distractions during combat. In siege warfare, armor provided crucial protection against falling stones, burning oil, and other defensive measures employed by besieged forces. The comprehensive nature of plate armor meant that knights could operate in environments that would be extremely dangerous for less protected warriors. The siege warfare environment presented unique challenges that armor was specifically designed to address. Defenders on castle walls could rain down projectiles of all kinds: stones, arrows, boiling oil, and even excrement. The protection offered by armor allowed knights to approach fortifications and operate siege equipment while under this constant bombardment. Specialized pieces like great bassinets with extended protection for the neck and shoulders were developed specifically for siege warfare. The ability to survive in such hostile environments made armored knights invaluable for siege operations, both as attackers and as commanders who needed to direct operations while exposed to enemy fire. The psychological impact of heavy armor was another crucial factor in its adoption and continued use. The sight of a fully armored knight was intimidating to both enemies and allies alike. The anonymous, metallic figure presented an inhuman appearance that could strike fear into the hearts of opposing forces. This psychological warfare was particularly effective against peasant militias and lightly equipped troops who might break and run rather than face what appeared to be an invulnerable metal giant. The dehumanizing effect of armor was deliberate and served to enhance the knight's effectiveness as an instrument of warfare. The inability to see the face or expressions of an armored opponent made them seem more like an implacable force of nature than a human adversary. The intimidation factor of armor extended beyond its visual impact. The sound of a fully armored knight moving created a distinctive metallic noise that could be heard across a battlefield. This auditory signature served as both a psychological weapon and a means of identification. Allies could recognize the approach of friendly armored knights by sound, while enemies might be demoralized by the clanking approach of what they knew to be heavily protected opponents. Some knights deliberately enhanced these effects by adding decorative elements that would create additional noise, or by choosing armor designs that maximized their imposing appearance. From the knight's own perspective, wearing armor provided a psychological boost that was almost as valuable as the physical protection. Knowing that he was well protected allowed a knight to fight with greater aggression and confidence. He could take risks in combat that would be suicidal for an unarmored warrior, pressing attacks and maintaining offensive pressure even when surrounded by enemies. This mental edge often proved as decisive as the armor's physical protective properties. The confidence that came from wearing armor allowed knights to maintain their composure in the chaos of battle, making tactical decisions and leading their forces effectively even under extreme stress. The psychological transformation that occurred when donning armor was profound and lasting. Many knights reported feeling fundamentally different when fully armored, as if they had become something more than human. This transformation wasn't merely psychological, but had practical implications for combat effectiveness. The confidence and aggression that armor provided could make the difference between victory and defeat in individual combats. The knowledge that one possessed superior protection could enable tactical choices that might otherwise be impossible, such as charging into seemingly hopeless situations or holding positions against overwhelming odds. The tactical advantages of heavy armor extended to mounted combat, which was the knight's primary domain. The weight of armor actually provided some benefits when fighting from horseback, as it lowered the rider's center of gravity and made him harder to unseat. The additional mass also increased the impact force of mounted charges, allowing armored knights to break through enemy formations that might have held against lighter cavalry. The protection offered by armor meant that knights could maintain their momentum through enemy ranks, cutting down opponents without fear of light weapons that couldn't penetrate their defenses. The combination of armor, horse, and weapons created a military system that dominated European battlefields for centuries. The physics of mounted combat were fundamentally altered by the introduction of heavy armor. The additional weight of knight and armor, when combined with the speed of a charging warhorse, created enormous kinetic energy that could be devastating when applied to enemy formations. The lance, when wielded by a heavily armored knight on horseback, became one of the most effective weapons in medieval warfare. The protection offered by armor allowed knights to maintain their courage and formation discipline during charges, even when facing prepared enemy positions. The psychological impact of a charge by heavily armored cavalry was often sufficient to break enemy morale before physical contact was even made. However, heavy armor also imposed significant tactical limitations that knights had to work within. The increased weight reduced the endurance of both horse and rider, limiting the duration of combat effectiveness. Extended battles could exhaust even the most physically fit knight, as the effort required to move and fight while wearing 60 or 70 pounds of metal was enormous. This limitation meant that armored knights were most effective in short, decisive engagements rather than prolonged conflicts. The tactical doctrine of knightly warfare evolved to emphasize quick, decisive actions that could achieve victory before the limitations of armor became critical factors. The endurance limitations imposed by armor had strategic implications that extended far beyond individual combats. Medieval armies that relied heavily on armored knights had to plan their campaigns around the limitations of their primary striking force. Battles had to be fought when conditions favored the knights, and prolonged engagements that might exhaust the armored forces had to be avoided. This led to the development of tactical doctrines that emphasized decisive action and the concentration of force at critical moments. The famous charges of medieval heavy cavalry were as much products of necessity as they were of tactical preference. The mobility restrictions imposed by armor also influenced knightly tactics and fighting techniques. While well-fitted armor allowed for surprising freedom of movement, it still constrained certain actions and required adaptations to traditional fighting methods. Knights had to develop specialized techniques for fighting in armor, including methods for getting back on their feet if knocked down, and tactics for exploiting the vulnerabilities in enemy armor. These skills were taught from childhood to those destined for knighthood and required years of practice to master. The fighting schools that emerged in the later medieval period developed sophisticated curricula for training armored combatants, including techniques for grappling in armor, using specialized weapons, and exploiting the weak points in enemy protection. The development of armored fighting techniques was a continuous process that evolved along with armor technology. As armor became more sophisticated, new techniques had to be developed to deal with its capabilities and limitations. The art of fighting in armor became increasingly specialized, with different techniques required for different types of armor and different combat situations. Masters of arms developed detailed treatises on armored combat, documenting techniques for everything from mounted combat with lances to close-quarters grappling with daggers. These manuals provide fascinating insights into the sophisticated martial arts that developed around armored warfare. The development of specialized weapons designed specifically to defeat armor created an ongoing technological arms race throughout the medieval period. As armor became more effective, weaponsmiths responded by creating tools specifically designed to exploit its weaknesses. These included specialized daggers called rondel daggers or misericordes that could slip between armor plates, war hammers with picks that could puncture metal, and polearms with various specialized points, blades, and hooks designed to catch and manipulate armored opponents. The evolution of these anti-armor weapons forced continuous improvements in armor design, creating a cycle of innovation that drove technological advancement throughout the medieval period. The rondel dagger represented one of the most effective responses to the development of plate armor. These weapons featured long, narrow blades designed specifically to penetrate the gaps between armor plates or to slip through the vision slits of helmets. The technique for using rondel daggers required intimate knowledge of armor construction and the ability to identify vulnerable points even in the stress of combat. These weapons were particularly effective in close combat situations where opponents had been grappled or knocked down, allowing skilled fighters to deliver precise thrusts to unprotected areas. The development of rondel daggers and similar specialized weapons demonstrates the continuous evolution of medieval warfare technology. War hammers and similar blunt weapons represented another approach to defeating armor. Rather than trying to penetrate the armor directly, these weapons sought to deliver crushing blows that could damage the armor itself or cause severe injuries to the wearer through the transmission of impact force. The picks and spikes featured on many warhammers could concentrate tremendous force on very small areas, potentially punching through even thick armor plates. The psychological effect of these weapons was also significant, as the sound and feel of heavy blows against armor could be deeply unsettling, even when the protection held. The development of increasingly sophisticated blunt weapons forced armor designers to pay greater attention to impact resistance and internal padding systems. The introduction of gunpowder weapons in the late medieval period presented the greatest challenge to the dominance of heavy armor. Early firearms were crude and unreliable, but they could generate enough force to penetrate even the best plate armor at close range. This development marked the beginning of the end for the age of the armored knight, though the transition was gradual and took several centuries to complete fully. The initial response to firearms was similar to the response to other new weapons. Armorers attempted to create protection that could defeat the new threat. However, the energy levels generated by gunpowder weapons proved to be beyond what practical armor could handle. The first firearms to appear on European battlefields were relatively primitive devices that were slow to load, inaccurate, and prone to mechanical failure. However, their psychological impact was enormous, as the thunderous noise and smoke they produced could panic both horses and men who had never encountered such weapons. The ability of early firearms to penetrate armor that had previously been virtually invulnerable was deeply disturbing to the knightly class, who saw their military dominance threatened by weapons that could be operated by common soldiers with relatively little training. The democratizing effect of firearms was similar to that of the crossbow, but far more dramatic in its implications. Armorsmiths initially attempted to meet the challenge of firearms by creating thicker, heavier plates that could resist gunshot. These proofed armors were tested by actually firing weapons at them to ensure their effectiveness. However, the weight required to stop increasingly powerful firearms made armor impractical for field use. By the 16th century, full suits of armor were becoming obsolete on the battlefield, though they continued to be used for ceremonial purposes and in specialized contexts like tournaments. The proof marks left by testing shots became badges of honor that demonstrated the quality of armor, even as that armor was becoming increasingly irrelevant to actual warfare. The process of proofing armor was itself dangerous and required considerable skill and courage. Armorers had to determine the appropriate distance and weapon type for testing, ensuring that the armor could withstand the types of attacks it was likely to encounter in battle. The testing process often involved multiple shots at different angles and ranges to ensure comprehensive protection. Failed tests could result in armor that had to be scrapped or extensively reworked, representing enormous financial losses for both armorer and client. The marks left by successful proof shots became permanent features of the armor, serving as certificates of quality that owners displayed with pride. The regional variations in armor design reflected different fighting styles, available materials, and cultural preferences across medieval Europe. Italian armor was renowned for its elegant lines and sophisticated articulation, reflecting the advanced metallurgical techniques developed in the city-states of northern Italy. The Italian peninsula's position as a center of trade and learning allowed armor workshops there to access the best materials and most advanced techniques from across Europe and beyond. Italian armorers became famous for their ability to create armor that was both highly protective and remarkably light, achieving this through superior steel quality and more efficient design principles. The workshops of Milan, in particular, became legendary throughout Europe for producing armor of unmatched quality and sophistication. German armor, particularly that produced in Augsburg and Nuremberg, was famous for its robust construction and elaborate decoration. German armorers developed distinctive techniques for creating heavily reinforced armor that could withstand the most brutal combat conditions. The German style emphasized functionality over elegance, producing armor that was built to last through extensive use in harsh conditions. German workshops also became renowned for their innovative approaches to decoration, developing techniques for creating elaborate surface treatments that enhanced both the protective and artistic value of their products. The guild system in German cities ensured high standards of quality and encouraged continuous innovation in armor design and production techniques. English armor was typically more practical and less ornate, reflecting the pragmatic military traditions of the British Isles. English armorers focused on creating equipment that was effective, reliable, and suited to the specific conditions of English warfare. The influence of the longbow on English military thinking can be seen in the design of English armor, which often featured additional reinforcement in areas most vulnerable to arrow strikes. English workshops developed distinctive techniques for creating armor that could be produced more quickly and economically than continental examples, reflecting the need to equip large numbers of men-at-arms for extended campaigns. The practical approach of English armorers resulted in designs that prioritized function over form, though the best English armor could rival continental examples in both quality and effectiveness. These regional differences weren't merely aesthetic. They reflected genuine differences in fighting techniques and battlefield conditions. Italian armor was designed for the style of mounted combat popular in the Italian peninsula, with emphasis on mobility and elegant swordwork. The relatively open battlefields of northern Italy favored armor that allowed for quick movement and complex maneuvers, leading to designs that prioritized articulation and weight reduction. Italian fighting techniques emphasized precision and finesse over brute force, requiring armor that could facilitate complex sword techniques and rapid changes of position. The social and cultural values of Italian city-states, with their emphasis on individual achievement and artistic excellence, were reflected in armor designs that combined military effectiveness with aesthetic sophistication. German armor was built for the heavier, more aggressive fighting style favored in the Holy Roman Empire, where battles often involved more brutal close-quarters combat. The political fragmentation of the German lands led to frequent conflicts that were often fought with particular intensity, creating demand for armor that could withstand the most severe combat conditions. German fighting techniques emphasized power and endurance over finesse, requiring armor that could protect against the heaviest weapons and most violent attacks. The cultural values of German knightly society, with their emphasis on martial prowess and military honor, were reflected in armor designs that prioritized protection and durability above all other considerations. English armor reflected the longbow-dominated battlefields of the Hundred Years' War, with additional reinforcement in areas most vulnerable to arrow strikes. The unique tactical situation faced by English forces fighting extended campaigns in hostile territory while facing enemies equipped with crossbows and other missile weapons created specific requirements for armor design. English armorers developed techniques for creating additional protection against projectile weapons without significantly increasing weight or restricting mobility. The practical demands of English military campaigns, which often required equipment to be transported over long distances and maintained in difficult conditions, influenced armor designs that emphasized durability and ease of maintenance. The role of tournaments in driving armor development cannot be overlooked. These elaborate martial contests were not merely entertainment, but served as testing grounds for new armor designs and fighting techniques. The controlled environment of the tournament allowed armorers and knights to experiment with new ideas without the life-or-death stakes of actual warfare. Many innovations that later proved valuable in battle were first developed for tournament use, where their effectiveness could be evaluated under relatively safe conditions. The tournament circuit created a network of communication between armor workshops across Europe, facilitating the rapid spread of new techniques and innovations. The competitive nature of tournaments also drove continuous improvement in armor design, as knights sought every possible advantage over their opponents. Tournament armor often differed significantly from battle armor, as the specialized nature of tournament combat allowed for different design priorities. Tournament plates could be heavier and more restrictive, since mobility wasn't as crucial in the controlled environment of the lists. They could also incorporate specialized features like reinforcing pieces for specific events or attachment points for tournament-specific equipment. The most elaborate tournament armors were works of art that demonstrated the wealth and status of their owners, while providing maximum protection for the dangerous sport of mounted combat with sharp weapons. The pageantry and ceremony associated with tournaments created demand for armor that was not just functional, but visually impressive, leading to increasingly elaborate decorative schemes and artistic innovations. The specialized nature of different tournament events led to the development of armor pieces designed for specific competitions. Jousting armor, for example, featured asymmetrical designs that provided extra protection on the left side where opponents would approach, while allowing greater freedom of movement on the right side for weapon handling. Foot combat tournaments required different armor characteristics than mounted events, leading to the development of specialized pieces that optimized protection and mobility for fighting on foot. The scoring systems used in tournaments also influenced armor design, as competitors sought to maximize their defensive capabilities while maintaining the offensive potential necessary to score points against their opponents. The social aspects of tournament participation were closely tied to armor quality and decoration. A knight's tournament armor served as a display of his wealth, status, and commitment to chivalric ideals. The most successful tournament competitors became celebrities of sorts, with their armor designs being copied and imitated by aspiring knights throughout Europe. The patronage relationships that developed around tournament participation created financial incentives for armor innovation, as wealthy sponsors competed to equip their champions with the most advanced and impressive equipment available. The tournament circuit thus became a driving force for armor development that complemented and enhanced the innovations driven by military necessity. The decline of heavy armor didn't happen overnight, but was the result of multiple converging factors. The increasing effectiveness of firearms was certainly the primary driver, but other developments also contributed to the obsolescence of the armored knight. Changes in military organization, with greater emphasis on professional infantry armed with pikes and other polearms, reduced the dominance of heavy cavalry on the battlefield. The enormous expense of maintaining armored forces became increasingly difficult to justify as other military technologies proved more cost-effective. The social and political changes of the Renaissance period also undermined the feudal system that had supported the knightly class, reducing both the resources available for armor production and the social incentives for its use. The development of professional armies represented a fundamental shift in military organization that reduced the importance of individual knights. These new forces emphasized discipline, training, and coordinated tactics over individual martial prowess. The standardized equipment used by professional soldiers was cheaper to produce and maintain than the customized armor worn by knights, making it possible to equip much larger forces for the same cost. The tactical innovations developed for professional armies, including complex pike formations and coordinated use of missile weapons, proved highly effective against traditional knightly cavalry. The professionalization of warfare thus reduced the tactical advantages that had made heavy armor worthwhile for centuries. The economic factors driving the decline of armor were complex and multifaceted. The cost of producing and maintaining high-quality armor continued to rise throughout the late medieval period, as increasing sophistication drove up both material and labor costs. At the same time, the effectiveness of alternative military technologies was improving rapidly, offering better cost-benefit ratios than traditional armored cavalry. The emergence of centralized monarchies with access to new sources of revenue allowed rulers to field large armies of professional soldiers equipped with standardized weapons and armor. The economic advantages of mass production over custom craftsmanship became increasingly apparent, leading to the gradual abandonment of the expensive, individualized approach to military equipment that had characterized knightly warfare. The social changes of the Renaissance period also contributed to the decline of heavy armor. The rise of centralized monarchies with professional armies reduced the importance of the feudal knight as an independent military force. Warfare became increasingly dominated by large-scale formations of trained soldiers rather than individual heroic combat between armored nobles. The romantic ideal of the knight in shining armor persisted in literature and popular culture long after the military reality had disappeared from European battlefields. The transformation of warfare from a pursuit dominated by noble amateurs to one controlled by professional soldiers fundamentally altered the social context in which armor had flourished. The cultural shift away from individual combat toward mass warfare represented a fundamental change in military thinking. The heroic ideal of the knight, engaging in personal combat with his equals, gave way to more pragmatic approaches that emphasized collective action and technological superiority. The new military technologies, particularly firearms and artillery, reduced the importance of individual skill and courage while increasing the value of discipline and coordinated action. The democratic implications of these changes were profound. As military effectiveness became less dependent on social status and more dependent on training and equipment that could be provided to common soldiers. Despite its eventual obsolescence, the legacy of heavy armor continues to influence military thinking and equipment design to this day. The principle of providing maximum protection to valuable personnel while maintaining operational effectiveness remains central to modern military doctrine. Body armor worn by today's soldiers follows many of the same design principles developed by medieval armorers, including the use of layered protection, strategic placement of reinforcement, and careful attention to weight distribution. The challenges faced by medieval armorers in balancing protection, weight, and mobility are remarkably similar to those confronted by designers of modern protective equipment. Modern body armor systems incorporate many innovations that would be familiar to medieval armorers. The use of multiple layers with different protective properties mirrors the combination of gambeson and mail used by early knights. The strategic placement of additional protection in areas most likely to be targeted by enemies follows principles established by medieval plate armor designers. Even the economic considerations remain similar, as modern military organizations must balance the cost of advanced protective equipment against other military priorities. The lessons learned from centuries of armor development continue to inform modern approaches to soldier protection and survivability. The technological innovations developed for medieval armor also contributed to advances in other fields. The metallurgical techniques perfected by armorers influenced the development of tools, weapons, and eventually industrial machinery. The precision required for armor articulation helped drive advances in mechanical engineering that later proved valuable in clockmaking, scientific instruments, and other precision crafts. The economic systems developed to support armor production contributed to the growth of specialized manufacturing and international trade in luxury goods. The impact of armor technology thus extended far beyond its immediate military applications, contributing to broader technological and economic developments that shaped European civilization. The manufacturing techniques developed for armor production were among the most sophisticated of the medieval period. The organization of armor workshops, with their complex division of labor and quality control systems, provided models that were later applied to other industries. The international trade in armor and armor-making expertise helped establish commercial networks that facilitated broader economic development. The investment in research and development that characterized the armor industry provided examples of how technological innovation could drive economic growth and competitive advantage. The lessons learned from the armor industry thus contributed to the broader economic transformation of medieval Europe. The cultural impact of the armored knight extends far beyond the medieval period. The image of the knight in shining armor became one of the most enduring symbols of medieval Europe, representing ideals of honor, courage, and military prowess. This romanticized vision influenced literature, art, and popular culture for centuries after the last knight had hung up his armor. From the chivalric romances of the late medieval period to modern fantasy literature and films, the armored knight remains a powerful symbol of heroic martial valor. The cultural legacy of knightly armor thus extends far beyond its historical military significance, continuing to shape popular understanding of medieval society and values. The artistic achievements of medieval armorers continue to be celebrated and studied centuries after their military relevance ended. The greatest examples of medieval armor are recognized as masterpieces of metalworking that combine functional excellence with aesthetic beauty. Museums around the world preserve and display these artifacts as examples of human creativity and technical skill. The study of historical armor provides insights not only into military history, but also into the broader cultural, economic, and technological development of medieval civilization. The preservation of these artifacts ensures that future generations can appreciate and learn from one of humanity's most remarkable technological achievements. The preservation of medieval armor in museums around the world allows us to appreciate not only its functional effectiveness, but also its artistic beauty. These surviving examples represent some of the finest metalworking ever achieved, combining functional excellence with aesthetic appeal in ways that modern manufacturing techniques struggle to match. Each piece tells a story not just of military history, but of human creativity, craftsmanship, and the eternal struggle between offense and defense in human conflict. The detailed study of preserved armor pieces provides invaluable insights into medieval manufacturing techniques, social structures, and artistic traditions that would otherwise be lost to history. The conservation challenges associated with preserving medieval armor are complex and ongoing. The iron and steel components are vulnerable to corrosion, particularly in museum environments where humidity and temperature fluctuations can accelerate deterioration. Conservation specialists must balance the need to preserve original materials with the requirement to maintain artifacts in displayable condition. Advanced techniques, including laser cleaning, electrochemical treatments, and specialized coatings, have been developed to help preserve these irreplaceable artifacts for future generations. The investment in armor conservation reflects the recognition of these objects as important cultural heritage that transcends their original military function. Understanding why knights wore heavy armor requires us to appreciate the complex interplay of technology, economics, social structure, and military necessity that defined medieval warfare. The decision to burden oneself with 60 or 80 pounds of metal wasn't taken lightly. It was a calculated choice based on the realities of medieval combat and the social expectations of knightly class. The armor provided not just physical protection, but also psychological advantages, social status, and tactical capabilities that made it an essential part of knightly identity. The investment in armor represented a commitment to a way of life that valued martial excellence, social honor, and military effectiveness above comfort and convenience. The comprehensive nature of the armor system developed during the medieval period reflects the sophistication of medieval military thinking. Every aspect of armor design was carefully considered and optimized for specific purposes. The materials, manufacturing techniques, fitting procedures, and maintenance requirements all contributed to a system that maximized protection while maintaining operational effectiveness. The success of this system is evident in its longevity and the profound impact it had on medieval society. The centuries-long dominance of armored cavalry in European warfare demonstrates that the investment in heavy armor was justified by its military effectiveness. The evolution from simple mail shirts to elaborate suits of articulated plate armor represents one of history's most successful examples of adaptive technology. Each innovation was driven by specific challenges and refined through practical experience on countless battlefields. The result was a protective system that allowed its wearers to dominate European warfare for centuries, fundamentally shaping the military and social development of medieval civilization. The continuous refinement of armor technology demonstrates the medieval capacity for innovation and adaptation, qualities that are sometimes overlooked in popular perceptions of the medieval period as static and unchanging. The technological achievements represented by medieval armor are particularly impressive when considered in the context of the limited manufacturing capabilities available at the time. Without modern machinery, precision tools, or advanced metallurgical knowledge, medieval armorers created protective systems that were remarkably effective and sophisticated. The techniques they developed for shaping metal, creating articulated joints, and achieving precise fits were the result of generations of accumulated knowledge and experience. The quality of the best medieval armor demonstrates that technological limitations need not prevent the achievement of exceptional results when combined with skill, dedication, and continuous refinement. The story of knightly armor also illustrates the importance of specialized craftsmanship in pre-industrial societies. The creation of high-quality armor required skills that took decades to master and tools that represented significant technological achievements in their own right. The relationship between knight and armorer was one of mutual dependence. The knight's life depended on the armorer's skill, while the armorer's livelihood depended on the knight's success and continued patronage. This symbiotic relationship drove continuous improvement in both craftsmanship and design, creating a cycle of innovation that benefited both parties and advanced the state of military technology. The international nature of the medieval armor trade demonstrates the sophisticated commercial networks that existed in medieval Europe. Armor and armor-making expertise moved freely across political boundaries, creating a truly international market for military technology. The reputation of particular centers of armor production, such as Milan or Augsburg, extended across the continent and beyond. This international trade facilitated the rapid spread of innovations and ensured that the best techniques and materials were available to those who could afford them. The globalization of armor production in the medieval period provides an early example of how technological excellence could transcend political divisions and create economic prosperity. As we reflect on this remarkable period in military history, we can see that the decision of knights to wear heavy armor was ultimately a rational response to the conditions of their time. Faced with evolving weapons technology, changing battlefield tactics, and the social expectations of their class, they chose the protection and advantages that armor provided, despite its considerable costs and limitations. The success of this choice is evident in the longevity of armored warfare and the profound impact it had on medieval society. The knights of medieval Europe understood that military effectiveness required constant adaptation and investment in the best available technology, principles that remain relevant to military thinking today. The legacy of the armored knight reminds us that military technology has always been driven by the fundamental human desire to protect oneself while maintaining the ability to achieve tactical objectives. Whether it's a medieval knight encased in steel plates or a modern soldier wearing advanced body armor, the basic principle remains the same. Protection enables effectiveness, and effectiveness ensures survival. The knights of medieval Europe understood this truth and built their entire military culture around it, creating one of history's most iconic and effective warrior traditions. Their commitment to excellence in both equipment and training established standards that influenced military development for centuries to come. In the end, knights wore heavy armor because it worked. Despite its weight, expense, and limitations, armor provided the protection and tactical advantages necessary for success in medieval warfare. It allowed them to dominate battlefields, maintain their social position, and fulfill their military obligations to their feudal lords. The sight of a knight in full armor represented the pinnacle of medieval military technology and social achievement, a walking testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest for security in a dangerous world. As we close this exploration of medieval armor, we can appreciate not just its practical effectiveness, but also its role in shaping one of history's most fascinating and influential warrior cultures. And with that understanding, we bid farewell to the age of knights and armor and wish you all a very good night.